In the next few minutes, I'm going to share things with you that my clients wish they'd known from day one. We're talking real stories, backed by research, and most importantly, actual solutions that work. Whether you're going through this right now, supporting someone who is, or just want to protect your family, you need to hear this. But I want to warn you, some of what I'm about to share might be hard to hear, because when it comes to infidelity's impact on families, the truth isn't pretty. But understanding it, that's the first step toward healing. Take a deep breath. Are you ready? Because we're about to dive into what really happens when infidelity walks through your front door. And let me tell you, the first changes happen faster than you'd think. Have you ever watched a glass shatter in slow motion? That's exactly what happens in a home during those first moments after discovering infidelity. Everything seems to move in slow motion, yet somehow it all happens too fast to process. Each piece of what you thought was your normal life starts to crack, then break, then fall, and you can see it happening, but you can't stop it. I remember sitting with Maria in my office just 3 days after she found that email. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold her coffee cup. "I don't understand," she kept saying. "Everything looks the same, but nothing feels right anymore." She wasn't just talking about her marriage. She was talking about the way her 7-year-old daughter had started clinging to her leg like a toddler again, how her teenage son had suddenly become a ghost in their own home, how even making a simple decision like what to cook for dinner felt impossible. The thing about infidelity is that it doesn't just break hearts, it breaks routines, traditions, trust, and the very foundation of family life. Within those first 48 hours, everything changes. The American Association for Marriage and Family Therapy has found that when infidelity enters a home, it affects every single family member's brain chemistry, stress hormones spike, sleep patterns disturb, even basic appetite changes. It's like someone pressed a pause button on normal life, except nothing actually stops. It just all goes wrong. Think about your morning routine for a second, the little dance we all do, getting everyone ready for school and work. Now imagine that same routine when nobody slept properly for days, when every phone notification makes someone flinch, when the simple act of saying goodbye becomes loaded with fear and doubt. That's what happens in these homes. Research shows that family routines change dramatically within the first week, not because anyone decided to change them, but because nobody can remember how to do normal anymore. And then there's the money. Oh, the money. Nobody talks about this part enough, but I'm going to, because it's crucial. Within the first month after discovery, bank accounts often become battlegrounds, not just because of potential separation costs, but because trauma changes how we handle money. I've seen it happen countless times. Emotional spending spikes through the roof. One partner empties accounts out of fear. Another starts hiding money out of anger. Meanwhile, bills sit unopened because just looking at them feels overwhelming. The American Psychological Association reports that 65% of families face significant financial instability during this period, not because they're poor at managing money, but because nobody can think straight enough to manage anything. The children, they're the ones who see everything and say nothing. Like little emotional sponges, they absorb every tense silence, every forced smile, every whispered phone call. Even when parents think they're hiding it well, kids know. They always know. Research from the Family Process Institute shows that children as young as 3 can detect changes in family dynamics within hours of a crisis. They might not understand what's happening, but their bodies react. Stomach aches, headaches, sudden behavior changes. It's their way of saying, "I feel this too." Remember Maria's daughter starting to wet the bed again? That's actually a common regression response to family trauma. Her son skipping meals? That's his body's stress response kicking in. These aren't just behavioral issues, they're survival mechanisms. When the family system gets shaken, everyone in it develops their own coping strategies, healthy or not. But here's what really breaks my heart. Watching families try to maintain appearances in those early days. The forced family dinners where nobody eats. The school drop-offs where everyone pretends everything's fine. The social media posts that keep coming because nobody wants the world to know their life is falling apart. It's like watching people try to walk on broken legs. They're hurting themselves more by pretending they can still run. The communication patterns in the house change almost instantly too. Words become weapons, silence becomes a shield. Parents stop talking because they're afraid of fighting in front of the kids. Kids stop talking because they're afraid of making things worse. Even basic conversations become minefields. How was your day turns into a loaded question nobody knows how to answer honestly anymore. Those first few weeks, they're crucial. They set the tone for everything that follows. Families that get help during this period have a much better chance at healing. But here's the devastating truth: most don't. They're too overwhelmed, too ashamed, or simply too lost in the chaos to reach out. They don't realize that what they're experiencing isn't just emotional pain, it's psychological trauma that requires real, professional support. But what happens next? That's where the real transformation begins. Because while these initial changes feel like the world is ending, they're just the beginning of a much longer, deeper process that nobody sees coming. That raw, initial pain of discovery, as brutal as it is, it's just the beginning. Think of it like an earthquake. Those first few weeks are the main shock, but what really transforms a landscape are the aftershocks. They keep coming, month after month, revealing cracks in your family's foundation you never knew existed. I watched it happen with Maria's family. 6 months after Discovery Day, she came into my office looking more exhausted than she had in those first terrible weeks. "It's like living in a funhouse mirror," she told me. "Everything looks almost normal, but it's all twisted somehow." Her daughter, once the family's little ray of sunshine, had stopped telling jokes altogether. Her son's straight A report card had turned into a sea of C's and D's. Even their golden retriever seemed depressed, waiting by the door every evening for a family walk that hadn't happened in months. The Children and Families Institute recently released a study that confirmed what I've been seeing in my practice for years. 78% of children from homes affected by infidelity show significant behavioral changes that last well beyond the initial crisis. But it's not just about acting out or withdrawing. These kids start carrying weight that was never meant for their shoulders. Take teenagers, for example. They're already going through their own identity crisis, trying to figure out who they are and what love means. Now add their parents' infidelity into the mix. Research shows that teens who experience parental infidelity are 3 times more likely to develop trust issues in their own romantic relationships. They're watching their first blueprint for love get shattered, and they're trying to build their own relationships on that broken foundation. The younger ones? They're like emotional meteorologists, constantly scanning the family atmosphere for signs of another storm. A child development specialist I work with calls it hypervigilance in miniature. These kids start reading into everything. A parent coming home late from work isn't just late anymore, it's a trigger for panic. A hushed phone conversation becomes proof that everything's about to fall apart again. They're carrying trauma responses that could affect their relationships for decades to come. But here's something that shocked even me after 15 years in this field: the way infidelity rewrites family history. Every happy memory suddenly comes with a question mark. That amazing family vacation from 2 years ago? Someone always wonders if the other person was already in the picture. Those beautiful anniversary photos on the wall. They become painful reminders of what might have been a lie. The Family Relations Institute found that this retroactive doubt, as they call it, can affect up to 3 generations of a family. The financial aftershocks are just as devastating, but in ways nobody expects. Sure, everyone thinks about potential divorce costs or separate households, but what about the therapy bills for every family member? The tuition money that suddenly has to go toward legal fees? The college savings that get drained because one parent starts emotionally spending? Studies show that families affected by infidelity experience an average 40% decrease in their financial stability over the following year. That's not just numbers on a page, that's dreams being put on hold, opportunities slipping away, futures being rewritten without anyone's consent. Then there's what I call the identity crisis ripple effect. It doesn't just stay between the couple. The entire family's sense of who they are gets called into question. Sunday dinners at grandma's house become diplomatic missions. Holiday traditions feel like walking through an emotional minefield. Even simple things, like who sits where at the dinner table, become loaded with meaning. The professional impact hits every family member too. That promotion Maria's son was up for at his part-time job, he missed it because he couldn't focus on training. Her daughter's dance recital that she'd been practicing for all year, she opted out at the last minute because what's the point of celebrating anything anymore? The American Workplace Institute reports that productivity drops by an average of 45% in families dealing with infidelity, and that number doesn't just apply to the adults. But here's the most insidious part: the way it changes how people see love itself. That same daughter who used to dream about her future wedding, she's now telling her mom she never wants to get married. The son who used to be a hopeless romantic, he's becoming cynical about relationships at 16. These aren't just phase reactions, they're fundamental shifts in how these young people view trust, commitment, and love. Remember those family dinners Maria used to cook, the ones that stopped in those first chaotic weeks? 8 months later, they still haven't really resumed. Not because no one's cooking, they're all eating, surviving. But that sense of family communion, that sacred space where everyone comes together to share their day, that's what's still missing. And reopening that space requires something much more complex than just setting the table again. It requires rebuilding trust, not just between partners, but between every single person who sits at that table. The transformation happening in these homes goes deeper than anyone can see from the outside. It's in the silence between words, in the hesitation before sharing good news, in the way family photos stop getting taken. But understanding these changes, really seeing them for what they are, that's the first step towards something crucial. Because what happens next in a family's journey depends entirely on how well they understand what they're really dealing with. You know that feeling when you look in the mirror and suddenly don't recognize yourself? That's what happens to every member of a family touched by infidelity. But it's not just about individual reflection. It's about how the entire family's mental landscape transforms. The changes run so deep that psychologists now consider family-wide infidelity trauma a distinct form of psychological injury. Let me take you back to Maria's family, 1 year after discovery. Her teenage son, once confident and outgoing, had developed what psychologists call anticipatory anxiety. He started checking his phone constantly, not because he was waiting for messages, but because he was terrified of missing one. When I asked him about it, his answer broke my heart. If I catch the bad news first, maybe I can protect everyone else this time. The National Institute of Mental Health recently published a groundbreaking study showing that children in families affected by infidelity experience changes in their brain's threat response system. They're constantly scanning for danger. Even in safe spaces, it's like their emotional security system has been permanently set to high alert. A door closing too loudly, a parent being 10 minutes late, a whispered conversation. Everything becomes a potential warning sign of impending disaster. But here's where it gets really fascinating. And by fascinating, I mean deeply concerning. The human brain has this incredible ability to adapt to trauma, but sometimes those adaptations become prisons. Take Maria's daughter, for instance. A year after the discovery, her grades had actually improved. She'd become the perfect student, the perfect daughter, the perfect everything. Sounds good, right? Except this perfectionism wasn't healthy. It was her way of trying to control an uncontrollable situation. If I'm perfect enough, she told me during a session, maybe no one will ever leave again. The American Psychological Association has identified what they call post-infidelity stress response in family members. It's similar to PTSD in many ways. Family members experience flashbacks to the discovery moment, emotional numbness, sudden panic attacks, and what psychologists call hyperarousal for being constantly on edge. But unlike other forms of trauma, this one comes with a unique twist. It makes people question every happy memory they've ever had. Think about that for a second. Imagine looking through your family photo album and wondering if you were the only one who thought those smiles were real. That's what happens in these families. Every birthday celebration, every holiday, every family vacation, they all get tainted with doubt. Research shows that this kind of retroactive questioning can actually alter memory formation in the brain. People literally begin to remember their past differently. The transformation in how family members view themselves is equally profound. Maria's son, who used to define himself as the family protector, now saw himself as the one who failed to see it coming. Her daughter, once proud of being daddy's little girl, struggled with what that identity even meant anymore. These aren't just temporary shifts in self-image. They're fundamental rewrites of personal identity. Trust becomes a complex psychological puzzle. It's not just about trusting other people anymore. It's about trusting your own judgment. A recent study from the Family Trauma Institute found that 82% of family members report losing confidence in their ability to read situations and people accurately. They start second-guessing every interaction, every relationship, every gut feeling they have. The anxiety patterns that develop are particularly insidious because they masquerade as protection. A teenager who never lets their phone battery die isn't just being responsible. They're terrified of being unreachable in a crisis. A child who suddenly becomes super helpful around the house isn't just being nice. They're trying to make themselves indispensable so no one will leave them. These behaviors might look positive on the surface, but they're rooted in deep psychological wounds. Then there's what therapists call emotional inheritance. Wow. The way these trauma responses get passed down through generations. I've worked with families where grandchildren who weren't even born when the infidelity happened show anxiety patterns similar to their parents. The Family Systems Institute has documented cases where 3 generations of women develop the same relationship fears after one case of infidelity in the family. Social relationships outside the family transform too. Friends often report that these families become either completely withdrawn or unusually clingy. There's no middle ground anymore. Either they're afraid to let anyone close enough to hurt them, or they're terrified of being alone with their thoughts. The isolation this creates only deepens the psychological impact, but perhaps the most profound transformation happens in how family members process love itself. The concept of unconditional love, that cornerstone of family life, gets called into question. Children who once took their parents' love for granted start trying to earn it. Parents who used to love freely become hesitant, afraid their affection might be misplaced again. Even simple expressions of love like hugs or saying, "I love you," become loaded with uncertainty. This psychological metamorphosis affects every aspect of daily life, but here's what's crucial to understand. Recognizing these changes isn't about accepting defeat. It's about understanding that what you're experiencing isn't just emotional pain or relationship drama. It's a complex psychological process that requires proper support and understanding to navigate, because while these transformations run deep, they don't have to be permanent. Recovery isn't a straight line. It's more like learning to walk again after a major injury. There are stumbles, setbacks, and moments when you wonder if you'll ever feel steady on your feet again. But here's what 2 decades of research and countless family stories have taught me. Healing is possible, even when the wounds run deep. Remember Maria's family. When they first started their healing journey, they could barely sit in the same room together. The silence was deafening. The pain was palpable, but 18 months after that devastating discovery, something remarkable started happening. It began with small moments, tiny cracks in the wall of pain they'd built around themselves. One evening, Maria's daughter laughed at dinner. It wasn't a big laugh, just a small chuckle at something her brother said. But in that moment, the whole family froze. They hadn't heard her laugh in so long that the sound felt foreign, almost magical. That little laugh became their first step toward healing. The Family Recovery Institute calls these moments breakthrough points, small instances where life's natural joy breaks through the trauma response. The recovery process follows a pattern that the American Psychological Association has studied extensively. They've found that families who successfully navigate this journey typically go through several distinct phases. Understanding these phases is crucial because it helps families recognize their progress even when it feels like they're standing still. The first phase is what we call stabilization. This isn't about fixing everything, it's about stopping the bleeding. For Maria's family, this meant establishing new routines that felt safe. Her son started doing his homework in the living room instead of hiding in his bedroom. Her daughter agreed to eat dinner with the family twice a week. No pressure to talk, just being present. These small steps might not sound like much, but they're like laying the foundation for a new house. Without them, nothing else can be built. Then comes the processing phase, where families start making sense of what happened. This is often the hardest part because it requires looking at the pain head-on. Research shows that families who work with trained therapists during this phase have a 65% higher chance of healthy recovery. It's not just about talking about feelings, it's about learning new ways to communicate, new ways to trust, new ways to be a family. Maria's son struggled with anger during this phase. He'd snap at small things, storm out of rooms, slam doors. But through therapy, he learned something profound. His anger wasn't really anger at all. It was fear dressed up as rage. Once he understood that, he could start dealing with the real emotion underneath. The Family Trauma Center reports that this kind of emotional recognition is crucial for long-term healing. The third phase is what psychologists call reintegration. This is where families start rebuilding their connections. But in a new way, they're not trying to recreate what was lost. They're building something different, often something stronger. It's like when a broken bone heals. The new bone growth is actually stronger at the point of the break. During this phase, Maria's daughter started a new tradition. Every Sunday, she'd bake cookies. Not because she had to, not because anyone asked her to, but because she wanted to create something sweet in a home that had tasted bitter for so long. These cookies became more than just dessert. They became a symbol of healing, of creating something new from broken pieces. The financial recovery runs parallel to the emotional one. Research shows that families who create clear financial boundaries and transparency during recovery have a 70% better chance of long-term stability. For Maria's family, this meant opening new joint accounts with clear oversight, setting up college funds with trusted third-party management, and creating emergency savings that gave everyone a sense of security. But perhaps the most beautiful part of recovery is watching families develop what psychologists call earned security. This isn't the blind trust of before, it's something deeper, more conscious. It's trust that has been tested, broken, and deliberately rebuilt. The Family Systems Institute has found that families who achieve this kind of security often develop stronger bonds than families who've never faced such challenges. Children in recovering families often develop remarkable emotional intelligence. Maria's son, who once couldn't express his feelings without anger, became someone his friends turned to for advice. Her daughter, who had retreated into perfectionism, learned to value progress over perfection. These aren't just coping mechanisms, they're new strengths forged in the fire of their experience. The recovery process also involves rebuilding the family's social network. Many families isolate themselves during the crisis, but healing requires community. Support groups, trusted friends, extended family, they all play crucial roles. The National Family Health Survey found that families with strong support networks are 3 times more likely to achieve healthy recovery. But here's what's most important to understand about recovery. It's not about forgetting or even necessarily forgiving. It's about learning to carry the experience in a way that doesn't break you. It's about finding strength you never knew you had, developing resilience you never thought possible, and discovering that family bonds can be both more fragile and stronger than you ever imagined. The path to healing isn't about returning to what was, it's about growing into what can be. Because sometimes the most beautiful gardens grow in soil that's been thoroughly turned over by storm. Understanding how infidelity devastates families is crucial, but knowledge alone isn't enough. The real question that keeps people up at night is this: how do we protect our families from going through this trauma in the first place? While there's no guaranteed shield against infidelity, decades of research and countless family stories have shown us that there are ways to strengthen your family's resilience before crisis strikes. The Family Protection Institute recently conducted a groundbreaking study that changed how we think about affair-proofing families. They discovered that it's not just about preventing cheating, it's about building a family system so strong that everyone in it feels secure enough to address problems before they become catastrophic. Think of it like maintaining a house. You don't wait for the roof to cave in before you check for leaks. Maria's story taught me something profound about prevention. After 2 years of healing, she shared an insight that stuck with me. If I'd known what to look for, maybe I could have protected my kids better. Not from the infidelity itself, we can't control other people's choices, but from the devastating impact it had on their sense of security. Let's talk about what that protection actually looks like. The American Institute of Family Studies has identified key factors that help families maintain their stability even in times of crisis. First among these is what they call emotional transparency. This isn't about sharing every feeling or thought. It's about creating an environment where family members feel safe expressing their concerns without fear of judgment or dismissal. In practical terms, this means establishing family check-ins that go deeper than "how was your day?" It means creating spaces where children can express their fears about relationships without being brushed off. Research shows that families who maintain regular, meaningful communication are 60% more likely to navigate relationship challenges successfully. Financial protection is another crucial aspect that people often overlook until it's too late. The Family Economic Security Council recommends what they call the 3-account system: joint accounts for family expenses, individual accounts for personal use, and separate emergency funds that require dual authorization to access. This isn't about trust issues. It's about creating financial stability that can weather any storm. But perhaps the most powerful form of protection comes from understanding what I call the early warning system of family dynamics. Just as your body sends signals when something's wrong, families have their own warning signs. The trick is learning to read them before they become emergencies. The National Family Health Survey found that 85% of families who experience infidelity had noticed subtle changes in their dynamics months or even years before discovery. These changes might look insignificant at first: a decrease in family dinners, fewer shared activities, communication that becomes increasingly superficial, but they're like small cracks in a foundation. Individually, they might not threaten the structure, but together, they can create vulnerabilities that make your family more susceptible to crisis. Building emotional resilience in children is another crucial aspect of family protection. This doesn't mean making them cynical about relationships, quite the opposite. It means teaching them that love requires both trust and boundaries, that healthy relationships involve open communication, and that their worth isn't dependent on someone else's choices. The Family Resilience Center has developed what they call emotional vaccination protocols, strategies for building psychological immunity in family systems. These include regular family councils where everyone's voice matters, creating clear boundaries that everyone understands and respects, and establishing rituals that strengthen family bonds. Legal protection matters too, though it's something many families are reluctant to discuss. Having clear financial documentation, understanding your rights and responsibilities, and maintaining transparent record-keeping isn't about preparing for the worst. It's about creating a framework of security that actually allows for greater trust. But here's what's fascinating about all these protection strategies. They don't just guard against infidelity. They create stronger, healthier family systems overall. Families who implement these practices report higher levels of satisfaction, better communication, and stronger bonds, regardless of whether they ever face infidelity. Remember those cookies Maria's daughter started baking during their recovery? They became more than just a Sunday tradition. They became a symbol of how protection and healing often involve the same ingredients: trust, transparency, and the willingness to create something new together. Today, Maria's family looks very different from what it was before the crisis, but in many ways, it's stronger. They've learned that protection isn't about building walls, it's about building bridges between each other that are strong enough to hold even when the ground shakes. Because ultimately, the best protection against family trauma isn't about preventing every possible crisis. It's about creating a family system that's resilient enough to weather any storm that comes its way. When infidelity walks through your door, it feels like the end of everything you've known and loved. The ground shifts, the walls crumble, and for a moment, or many moments, it feels impossible to imagine ever feeling whole again. But as we've seen through our journey today, while infidelity can shatter a family's world, it doesn't have to be their final chapter. Think back to where we started with Maria's family. That Tuesday morning when an email changed everything. The sleepless nights, the tears, the silence that felt louder than screams. Now 3 years later, her family has transformed into something different. Not better or worse, but stronger in the broken places. Her son, who once channeled all his pain into anger, now leads support groups for teenagers dealing with family trauma. Her daughter, who retreated into perfectionism, recently gave a speech at her school about emotional resilience. The National Center for Family Studies has found something remarkable. Families who successfully navigate infidelity trauma often develop what they call crisis immunity. They become more emotionally intelligent, more resilient, and more capable of handling future challenges. It's not because the pain made them stronger, it's because they learned to transform their pain into wisdom. But here's what I want you to remember, whether you're in the midst of this storm right now or trying to protect your family from future hurricanes. You are not alone. The statistics we talked about earlier, they're not just numbers. They're stories of real families who have walked this path before you. Families who felt the same pain, faced the same challenges, and somehow found their way to solid ground again. The Family Healing Institute reports that the single most important factor in recovery isn't time, money, or even professional help. Though all these things matter, it's the belief that healing is possible. Not easy, not quick, but possible. Every small step matters. Every moment you choose to stay present, every time you reach out for help, every time you refuse to let the pain define your family's future, these are victories worth celebrating. Remember what we learned about the brain's response to family trauma, how it creates new neural pathways, new ways of processing trust and love. The same adaptability that makes the pain so profound also makes healing possible. Your brain, your heart, your family system, they all have an incredible capacity for renewal. If you're watching this and recognizing signs we've discussed in your own family, take action now. Don't wait for the crisis to deepen. Reach out to family counselors who specialize in infidelity trauma. Connect with support groups where other families share their journeys. Start implementing those protection strategies we talked about, not from a place of fear, but from a place of wisdom and strength. For those already in the storm, remember Maria's words. The pain doesn't go away completely, but it changes shape. It becomes something you can carry without breaking. Your family's story isn't over. The next chapter might look different from what you imagined, but it can still be beautiful, still be worth living, still be filled with love and laughter and hope. The journey through infidelity's impact on a family is perhaps one of the hardest roads anyone can walk. But as I've witnessed countless times in my practice, it's a road that can lead to extraordinary transformation. Not because of the betrayal, but because of the courage families find within themselves to heal, to grow, to rebuild. As we close today, I want you to remember something powerful. Your family's worth isn't measured by its challenges, but by its capacity to face them together. Every family has its storms. Some are harder than others, but what matters most is not the storm itself, but how we learn to dance in the rain. Share your story in the comments below. Your experience might be the light someone else needs to find their way forward. Remember, in sharing our stories, we not only heal ourselves but create pathways of hope for others walking similar paths. Thank you for taking this journey with me today. Keep watching for more insights into family dynamics, healing, and growth. Together, we can build stronger, more resilient families. One story, one healing moment, one breakthrough at a time. Because in the end, it's not about returning to who we were before the storm. It's about discovering who we can become after weathering it together.